Hey everyone, Mark here, founder of Nexus, and today I'm creating a video for you, my fellow veterans, on what I'm dubbing the VA's weighted decision-making process. I made a video about this a couple months ago, and it's the video that had the most views. So my assumption is it's the video that gave the people the most value, but it also sparked the most intrigue slash need for education. Like that's why people watch it, because they're like, hey, this is intriguing. What's this about? First thing I want to say is nothing here is legal, financial, and medical advice. It's purely my opinion based on common sense and for your benefit and education. However, you still have to make your own decision after doing your own research. These frameworks that I'm sharing with you, well, they are based off common sense, are not like law. So I don't want you to like go up to the VA and say, hey, this guy on YouTube told me that if I do these things, I'm gonna win my claim. Now, the VA has its own rules. All I'm sharing with you is a framework that has worked for me in the past based on just common sense. And this does make sense when I explain it, which is the first thing I'm gonna do. So when you submit your claim, you wanna see it as if you step on a scale, and on the other side of that scale is the VA. Think of a seesaw, right? The heaviest person, it goes down towards their direction, the other person goes up. You're liable to get thrown off depending on the force of the downward velocity, let's say. So when you step onto that scale, though, that seesaw, the VA's truth is always going to be heavier than yours initially. And that has to be true. Otherwise, they would cut everyone benefits, and the government math will not work if they gave every benefit out to a veteran that applied for it. So they have to create a system where they're heavier, which means you're going to get denied initially, unless you can make yourself heavier with evidence, with your argument, with everything you can do to make yourself heavy. That's why it's the VA weighted decision-making process. And while this is something I made up, there is some credence to it, because when you look at your decision letters, you'll see statements, Nexus statements, we'll call them. It's like less likely than not. Unfortunately, many of us see that in our decision letters. That means that your argument is under 50% weight. So let's say that when you step onto the scale, the VA is 75 pounds and you're 25. Well, you're under the chance that you're telling the truth, you weigh less than the VA. So you don't meet the threshold. So it's less likely than not that you're telling the truth. Now, it doesn't mean you're a liar. That's one thing I want to mention here. It just means based on the evidence and the records, you're not heavy enough. So you are under the requirement. So it's less likely than not. I think the actual definition is your 50%, less than 50% chance. Less likely than not equals less than 50% chance. You're not heavy enough. Now, at least as likely as not, that's like a 50-50. So if you're on the seesaw with a VA, you're like perfectly balanced. It can go either way. They're supposed to give you the tie, like in baseball. I don't play baseball, so I don't know what the nuances to the rules are, but my understanding is they're supposed to give you that. Doesn't always work out, but if you lose a claim and it says at least likely as not, I've never seen that, but you could probably just go again and add a couple more things to make yourself a little bit more heavy, and you'll likely win that. I'm not a lawyer though, so you have to try it out for yourself to find out. Now, if you're more likely than not, usually you've won the claim. That means your truth, you're above that, you're heavier than the VA. So I won't even say it's 50-50. At least as likely as not, it's like as if the seesaw was dead even. But more likely than not means you are heavier. You're down here. You see, you're not like this. You're just a little bit heavier than the VA's truth. Well, they have to give it to you based on their rules. So while I made this framework up, it is based on these things that already exist. So having explained that, what I want to do is take two situations, common situations. These are fictional, but they're common. So if you fall into this category, I'm about to explain these two examples. It's purely coincidental, right? Just take the framework and run with it if you want. Make your own decisions there. But I'm going to go over some criteria here, and here they are. One, what are they claiming in terms of condition? And then two is going to be, what type of claim is it? Is it a direct claim? Is it a secondary? Is it a presumptive? And then the third thing is what type of evidence do they have? Right? Those are the three things I'm going to be looking at, and I'm going to give you an idea of what the weight is like. Now, this is all subjective, so I'm not assigning hard values to anything. I'm just giving you an idea so you understand the concept, so then you can turn around and apply common sense when you're going to set up your own claims. So let's talk about situation one, a veteran that's going for depression, sleep apnea, and let's say tinnitus, right? Let's say they're a combat arms person and their job is loud. So they're going for 3 conditions, and they're all direct service claims, meaning like they're filing it as if all 3 things happen directly from their service, which means they probably need active duty records to win 2 of those claims at least. We'll explain the third one, why they won't need active duty records. And finally, they only have VA medical evidence. So they don't have any active duty evidence, even though I just said they probably need it to win this claim. So, all right, let's say this veteran submits the claim. How would this play out? Remember, I'm going to make an assumption that the VA's weight is 75 pounds and this veteran is at 25 pounds. And they need to get heavier, at least 50-50 to win. Well, this weighted process applies to each single condition, not all of them at the same time. So let's take depression as the first one. Now, remember, this veteran did not go complain about mental health at all on active duty, but they have, let's say, a ton of VA medical evidence. Well, you could have 10,000 pages of VA medical evidence on depression, and it might be worth like 5 pounds. So that's all this veteran has. They don't have a Nexus letter. They don't have any active duty records. They don't have a buddy letter from someone that was there. Let's say they have a spouse that wrote them a letter. Fine, that's worth another 2 pounds. So they were at 25 pounds. Now they're at, 32 because they have a lot of medical records. We'll say they have 300 pages of depression paperwork from the VA. 10,000 is kind of egregious amount. And then they have a buddy letter from their spouse. So they started at 25 pounds. The VA's at 75. And for depression, maybe he's now at 32 pounds. Well, the VA is still at I don't know what that is, 68 pounds heavier. They're a lot heavier than you still. You got some ways to go. So not even close, right? Not even approaching close. That veteran will probably lose that claim as is unless they can add more weight on their end. See how this works? I'm assigning these fake values to get you to see that, hey, you got to get it as close to the middle as possible to win the claim. Now, the second condition, which is sleep apnea, let's say that they have a bunch of VA paperwork for sleep apnea, but let's say it's just a bunch of sleep studies and stuff about insomnia. It's not really about sleep apnea, and they're thinking that they're going to get 50% because a lot of their friends have 50%, but they don't even have CPAP machine in their VA medical records. They don't even have a diagnosis of sleep apnea, just the sleep tests. Well, what's that really worth? Even if you have 500 pages, might be worth 3 pounds, right? And your wife tells you snore, maybe another 2 pounds. So now you were 25 pounds, the VA is with 75 pounds. Maybe you're 30 pounds and they're at 70. Not even close. You're 20 pounds away from even having a chance to win the claim in the VA weighted decision process, something I made up, the term at least. Now let's talk about tinnitus. Well, tinnitus it's a direct service claim, but it also has a lot of properties with a presumptive claim. Presumptive claims are claims you can file where you don't actually have to have active duty medical evidence to file the claim. You could have just these presumptive types of evidence. That's what it is. You're presuming it's true. So how do you presume it's true? In a tinnitus claim, how loud was your job? That's one thing that the VA can presume to prove that you have, in this case, tinnitus, this veteran, from their service. So, if they worked out of an airfield, you can presume that they were exposed to loud noises for months and months and months on end, maybe even years, right? What was their MOS? Was it loud? The VA actually has a list that tells you, what the risk level is for each job. And if your risk level is high, well, there you go, right? they can presume that you're telling the truth. But you don't actually have active duty medical evidence. This veteran doesn't for tinnitus, but let's say they had a combat arms job. Let's say they were in the artillery. Let's just pretend. Well, that's probably going to be high on the list. And this veteran never went to sick call or whatever for tinnitus, and I don't know who ever did. Most of us had tinnitus, and none of us ever went. No one complains about that. You just accept it as a fact of life, which is probably why the VA made it has presumptive qualities rather. It's like the number one most claimed thing that vets win is tinnitus, and probably for that reason, the VA just conceded that. So no active duty evidence. Let's say, just for the sake of simplicity, they have a VA diagnosis for tinnitus. Even after the fact, most of us don't have a diagnosis. And I would argue you still don't need one. It's probably one of the only claims you can file that doesn't require a diagnosis is tinnitus. But let's assume they have one, just keep things simple. Well, that claim is a lot heavier than the other two because the way tinnitus is treated. You're an artillery person and you're artilleryman, and maybe you're in for 10 years. Well, that's pretty heavy proof that your tinnitus today is from your active duty service. So just your DD-214 that said you served 10 years artillery person, it's just like, man, that's probably worth like 30 pounds on its own. So now you were at 25%, now you're at 55 and the VA's at 45, simply because you're an artilleryman for 10 years. And you might not need anything else. That's not true though, because objectively, right, like, okay, the facts are you were artilleryman for 10 years, that's pretty heavy, but veterans still lose that type of claim all the time because they don't have a story, a statement, they have nothing together. So it's still possible to lose, even though the weight of your claim is heavy, you still have some explaining to do. But objectively, right, when you look at it, this is a highly winnable condition for this veteran that we're laying out here in this situation. So they're probably going to lose the depression claim. They're probably going to lose the sleep apnea claim. They're probably going to win the tinnitus claim. And that's how that all plays out. So let's take the second scenario. Let's take a combat veteran who, let's say they're armor. You know, they drove tanks, right? They're a tank crewman, and they were in for 7 years. They're going for PTSD, and they're going for lower back problems. Now, the way that they're trying to file these claims, the PTSD is a direct service claim, and then the lower back is going to be a secondary claim. We'll say that this veteran already has like a foot condition and knee condition that they're trying to file their back secondary to those already service-connected disabilities. Hopefully you're tracking with me. So that's the type of claim it is, not the condition, but the type. And then here's the evidence they have. Okay, well, for the PTSD, they don't have any active duty medical records, but let's say if this to say he was in the Army, he's got a combat action badge, right? Say he's got a buddy letter from a friend. So not necessarily medical evidence, but he has records that combat PTSD is legitimate. Now, I do want to add that on the VA side, let's say this veteran has insomnia and depression records, but they do not have a specific diagnosis for PTSD. That changes a lot, right? So we'll come to that later. For the lower back, let's say that for the last 2 years, they were seeing a doctor, and that doctor has a lot of notes about how the lower back is a problem, and it's connected to the knees and the foot. Like I have records personally where my doctor has said that they do think that, you know, my knees and my feet and my ankles cause back problems and vice versa. And let's say that this veteran has those 2 years, but then prior, you know, earlier on, they had another doctor that they saw for 5 years that said the same thing. So basically, this vet has 2 different doctors, both saying that they have back issues and it's likely connected to their foot problems and their knee problems. It's not a Nexus letter, but it's 2 separate doctors saying that that's true. So let's take these conditions and let me put them through the framework here. So on the PTSD side, So this veteran doesn't have any active duty evidence, and PTSD is one of those claims that it can be treated like a presumptive. Any evidence helps, but a lot of times people don't report PTSD in service, and so the VA probably just concedes that we're just going to take your word for it, and we're going to give you a little bit more weight than we normally would in this type of claim based on your story, based on your peripheral evidence. In this case, he's got a CAB, combat action badge, and a buddy letter from maybe his tank crewmen, people who were in this tank with him. Well, that's great. Nexus evidence is very heavy. It's very heavy. But remember, this veteran does not have a diagnosis for PTSD. They have a diagnosis for other mental health issues, but not specifically PTSD. And that right there can get you in trouble. It's kind of like you've got this awesome piece of equipment, but you haven't plugged it into the wall, so it's just dead weight. It's just worthless. So that's one way to look at this situation. Got all the ingredients, but you're missing one link. So this active duty evidence he has, probably worth like 5 pounds when it should be worth like 40 pounds. But it's because they don't have a diagnosis. You have all these ingredients, but because you don't have a diagnosis, well, you might be denied just based on that. Doesn't matter how heavy your evidence is, you're missing a vital piece of the puzzle here. We want to talk about the lower back next. So with the lower back, this veteran doesn't necessarily have any Nexus letters, but those 2 sets of records from those doctors that are saying the lower back is due to the knees and the feet, that's pretty compelling, right? Like, it's not a doctor giving you an exam, but let's say it's a doctor seeing you for 5 years and 2 years. When you look at it that way, they're more qualified to talk about your condition than a doctor you just bring in for an examination, especially if those sets of records have all the stuff that the VA is looking for anyways. In that case, it's pretty heavy. You don't, let's say this veteran did have, I don't know, a bunch of active duty records. I guess that would be useful in a direct service claim, but let's say they don't have any, let's go back, let's say they don't have any lower back records from active duty. Well, that doesn't matter because it's a secondary claim. You're not saying your back is messed up from service. You're saying it's messed up because of your knees and your feet. In this case, the VA medical evidence does matter, and it's pretty heavy based on what those 2 doctors are saying. So let's say that each of those pieces of evidence are worth like 12.5 pounds each. Now you're at 25 pounds. And with those 2 sets, now you're at 50 pounds because both are worth 12.5. 12.5 plus 12.5 is 25. You started at 25, you add another 25, you're at 50. Guess who else is at 50? The VA. And now you are eligible to win that claim. And I mean, you could see how it would make sense logically, right? So you still might lose that, but you're very close in my opinion. And if you were to pay a doctor to make this is the 3rd doctor basically saying the same thing. In my opinion, that's hard for them to keep saying no, especially in the secondary claim. So hopefully that wasn't confusing. Don't use this information for nefarious purposes. Use the framework to help you be more informed and put your stuff together cohesively so that you don't just add another bad claim to the backlog, right? That's something I don't talk about a lot in this channel, but there's a lot of issues with the backlog at the VA, and part of that reason is just people submit whatever type of claim they want, and it's not even that good. Doesn't help them, doesn't help the system, doesn't help the other veterans, and getting more education is always going to help you in your own journey. So I hope you got something from this. I hope that diving a little bit deeper into the weighted system gave you an idea and a framework to work off of. We'll do more of these in the future. And if you got value from it, please like the channel, subscribe to the channel, or like the video, and I'll see you in the next one.